more and more in the state of California, we are going to have to start thinking about it. We are in the process in the state of a complete change in the management structure of our water. It's a process that's going on now, and it's going to affect every one of us. It's going to affect the amount of water we can get, and it's going to affect what we pay for it. Our city, we get our water from mainly two sources. We get from the State Water Project, Cayugas Municipal Water District, and our local groundwater provider is United Water Conservation District, and we've been buying water for them for decades. And here today, we have from the United Water Conservation United Water Conservation District.
Decades old.
Decades old. You didn't tell you how old they are because we're going back that far. The chief hydrologist, Marty McEchron.
Hi. Well, thank you very much. So I'm the senior hydrologist for United Water Conservation District. I've been working at the district since 1998, actually. So I've been very fortunate to be working for the district in actually the wettest period ever on record, and now working for it in actually the driest period ever on record. And I will tell you that it's a whole lot more enjoyable to work during the wettest period on record than the driest, because people tend to fight over water in the driest, and the wettest, everyone gets along and we're all really happy. So anyway, I got something funny looking on my screen here. Just need to exit. Here, I'll do this. No.
Where's Perna at?
There we go. No.
This is his computer.
Exit. Yeah, this one's mine, and I, unfortunately, am not very good at this one. Home?
I'll sit there and push them if you tell me.
No, I can't figure out how to push this, so I'm just going to be pushing it on my own. I just need to get out of this, which is an exit. Oh, here we go, menu. I'll try this one. Wait, help, exit, escape. There we go. Ah, okay.
Thanks, Larry.
So yeah, United Water Conservation District is we're pretty much covering the Santa Clara River and the valley and the entire Oxnard Plain. And we're here to, basically our mission is to manage, protect, conserve, and enhance the water resources of the Santa Clara River Valley. So with that we do various things, but I'll get into that a little bit in a little bit later. It's kind of neat, actually, how this works out. There are really three main water districts in the county, and each one works in a very different way and has a lot to do with the geology and the hydrology of where they're located. So we do things very, very differently, even though we're very local and very close together. So if you look up north, so here we are, Ojai's up here, we have Casitas Municipal Water District. There, they have lots of mountains, and they actually have, because of the tall mountains, they have a fair amount of rain and runoff in this area. So that allowed them to build a dam. Because of the mountains, you're able to put a dam in there, and you're able to hold back water. And you're able to store water because you get a fair amount of rainfall. So Casitas works pretty much on try to keep the lake full as you can, and then you get through the droughts that way. So that way, that one worked very well for this area because of the high mountains. If we go look to the south of us, we have Cayugas. Now they don't have real high mountains in here. They don't have nearly as much rainfall as we do up in this area. And so therefore, and also they don't have groundwater, or very much groundwater. So they had to get their water from the State Water Project, so pulling it from up north predominantly. So that's how their basis, that's how they get their water. And then in the middle, we're kind of unique in that we have higher mountains in this range. So we have potential for high runoff, and also we have dams. So we own Lake Pyru right here. But what makes us a little bit unique is that we are capable of storing a whole lot more water in our groundwater aquifer system. So it's much more economical to put water and store it into aquifers than it is actually build more and more dams right here. So we're very unique in that we have kind of all three. We have the rainfall, the runoff, we have the rivers, we have dams, and then we also have groundwater storage. So kind of a neat little place to be, and it's kind of a neat place to work for because of that. So before I get into the history of this, I'd like to kind of go over the watershed, the hydrology, rainfall patterns and everything else so that we can kind of understand how the history of water resources in this area developed. Basically, this is the Santa Clara River watershed. Here's the LA Ventura County line. So actually almost half of our watershed is in LA County, but almost 80% of our water actually comes from the Ventura County side because that's where the rainfall is. There's not nearly as much rainfall out here. In fact, the Sespe right here, this creek right here, produces about 60% of the entire runoff in this watershed. So, and that's purely because there's a large range of mountains right here where all the clouds come up and basically it dumps in this little area right there. So we get a good amount of our runoff from the Sespe. The other important thing is the rainfall. Now this is the rainfall for the last 250 years in this area, given annually. So, well, here, wait. There you go. So basically this is precip in inches, and then this is the rainfall. So back, we have actual records for about 150 years, and before that, for the previous 100 years, we actually have estimates from other rain gauges and other lake storages and other things that we've actually developed. A long time ago, they developed this rainfall pattern in here. So when you kind of look at it, you see it's all over the place. Actually, our wettest year ever was 1998. We had 45 inches of rainfall, and our least ever was actually in the 1800s, where we had just under 5 inches. We were headed that way this year, actually, until the forecast for this next week, and I think we're actually we will surpass this historic low, but we were just a couple inches of rainfall so far, and so anyway, we should be passing the historic low. But, okay, so you look at this and it's kind of all over the place, but when you take an 8-year average of this, so if you take the previous 8 years and you average how much rainfall there was, what you begin to see are these kind of peaks and valleys, right? So what's happening is on these peaks, when this red line is going up, that means you're going into a wet period, and when it's going down, you're going into a dry period. And this really is what kind of helps us determine what projects have been built in the past. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I'll refer to wet periods and dry periods. You can look at, if you want to look at just this last 20 years, you can see we had the highest average rainfall ever back just 20 years ago, and now we're approaching right around the lowest now. So we've been accustomed to, when we think back in history, when we remember our lives here, when I was working through here, it was extremely wet, and then we've just immediately dropped down into one of the driest periods. So this is all very important in how we determine, what happens with water resources. Okay, so rainfall also, as you guys all know, everyone who lives here, falls pretty much in the wet season. Once you hit April, it's May, June, July. That's the reason why we all like to live here, is we don't have a whole lot of rainfall there. So if you're growing crops that rely on rainfall, obviously you can't rely on a whole lot during this period, which becomes an important part. That variability annually of rainfall also shows up in our rivers. So this is a very typical picture of the Santa Clara River during the dry season. This is pretty much the way it looks throughout most of it. It is bone dry. There are areas of rising groundwater where it stays wet, but for the most part, it's sandy, wide open, and dry. During the wet season, we'll have a variable amount of water going in it. So it looks so highly variable. And also, our storms vary greatly in size. So the Santa Clara River is really, that's one thing that is so different when you compare it to rivers up north, is the variability of flows. Is that Here, this is in 2005. There was about 140,000 cubic feet per second going over the diversion. This is the same place, right? Same place right here, where the tailwater actually was higher than the crest of the dam on this one. And then if you go out there to the Freeman diversion right now today, actually I think there's only 2 CFS. So there's 140,000 here, and right now there's only 2 CFS, which is basically 20 garden hoses or so, and that's it. So highly, highly variable. I'm hoping next week, we'll get, I'm hoping for at least something that looks like that, a nice small storm or something. We'd just be glad to see some water. By the way, if anybody wants to ask me questions in the middle of it, please do.
Can you drive to there and see it yourself?
Unfortunately, there are gates, but if you are interested, just call us up, and we usually will make sure that we can leave some gates open for some people to go up.
I've always heard the term of groundwater. How do they create aquifers or? I mean, is it like underground? Is it like a lake? I'm not sure exactly what an aquifer is.
Good question. And actually, I'm going right there. Okay, so the Santa Clara River, as I mentioned, we have these groundwater aquifers, and so here, this is Lake Piru. Just to get your bearings. Here's city of Ventura. We got Oxnard, Port Hueneme down in this area right here. And each one of these, this is the Santa Clara River going down here, but each one of these colored areas is an actual groundwater aquifer. So what was happening 20 million years ago, you can imagine when you get a rug or something and you push it together, what happens is you get these valleys and it goes up and down, right? So that's pretty much what was happening here in terms of the plate tectonics. We got 2 plates colliding together, it squeezed them together like that. So we have our mountains that got pushed up, but then at the same time, our valleys got pushed down further, right? And these are very erosive hillsides. So they erode down and they fill those valleys. As they got pushed down, they start filling them with sands and gravels. And that's really what an aquifer is. It's just pretty much just sands and gravels. And so there's lots of space in between for water to get to. Works really well. So we have, just incredibly more storage. We have hundreds of thousands of acre feet of potential storage in our aquifer system, where if we were to build dams to do that, it would just, well, you can't build dams anymore, but it'd just be very, very expensive. Yeah.
In more of a global context, how much effect on the average yearly rainfall does the El Nino and La Nina phenomena have on the rainfall for this area?
It can be a really good predictor. So let's go back to that rainfall. Sometimes when we have a strong El Nino, so a strong El Nino, for example, was 1998 right here, 2005. I think this one's, oh no, this is 41, where's 83, 85? Yeah, see, some of these really tall ones right in here are strong El Ninos. And they can be a really good indication. Unfortunately, one of these down here was also a strong El Nino. So there's a lot of variability in that. And, we felt, we were gonna have a good strong El Nino that time. And in fact, I don't know if you remember the term, somebody from JPL called it the Godzilla El Nino, and everyone's all excited about it. Well, that was one of these little wimpy years right here. So it's not 100%. We wish we could, because then we could manage lake releases and everything else much, much better, but we can also work on odds too, so.
You've got mail.
So these are the aquifer systems down here. So here's the city of Oxnard. What I'm going to do is we're going to look at this one right here. This is called the forebase. I'm going to blow up that area right now. We're going to look at that. And what's happening right here is that all underneath the city of Oxnard, we have kind of a clay cap, so to speak. And underneath that clay cap is an aquifer system. But we're really fortunate in that this area right in here, this is from the 101 bridge right here, and then you got the 118 going across here. This whole area this aquifer system actually surfaces and it goes through this clay cap is not there. So we're able to put water into this area right here, and it actually recharges the Oxnard plain, the aquifer system out here. So we've been given this really cool area that we're able to do that. In the meantime, the cities, as they grow here, really don't have an effect, at least in terms of water quality, anything, on our aquifer system, because you got that clay cap that's kind of protecting it. So it's really we're very, very fortunate. And this is where, of course, we put all of our facilities, all of our spreading facilities that I'll talk about in a while. So now what I want to do is we're going to look at that aquifer sideways. So we're going to cut the ground right here, and we're going to look this way in the basin to kind of get an idea of what does it look like. So right here, this is the forebay, the area that I talked about, that when we put water on the ground, it can actually percolate, or the river too, when it crosses it, actually percolates and goes into this aquifer system. And then over here, you have lots of clays and stuff where water can't really penetrate that. So it produces a little semi-perched aquifer system. So here's the city of Oxnard, Port Hueneme, you know, that sort of thing. They're over this clay cap. But history, as you will see, will start to look at this aquifer. Okay, so Port Hueneme is in actually the Santa Clara River in a way. We are not in the watershed technically, so when water runs off, it actually goes out here. But this is a 1927 aerial of Port Hueneme right here. I guess from my understanding, this building should be in there somewhere. Actually, it'd be where, right? Yeah, so it should be in this building. The building should be in there. But what I wanted to show you is that you can see these lines. This is, you know, these fields had just been put in not terribly all that long before that. And you can see all these lines right here. And what that is old scar lines from the Santa Clara River. So the Santa Clara River used to flow down through here, and occasionally would go down through Port Hueneme here. A long time ago. The last time ever on record is my understanding of when it started to breach and started to head this way was a famous storm in the 1880s.
Roy Lockwood told me it used to run down Channel Island Boulevard.
Yeah, okay, but that was before 1880 then, 1884. Okay, it's going back. So, but historically, you know, we're out in the delta there where they used to go back and forth. And finally, they started putting levees and controlling that water. As development started occurring, of course, they didn't want the Santa Clara River to plow through Port Hueneme. So it made perfect sense to start letting it up and bringing it over. Okay, so as I was putting this together, I began to realize that this whole story of history of water resources is really just a story of supply and demand. You know, that's all it is. It's very, very simple. Is that we have supply. Split the difference there. So we have supply of different things, and we have supply of rainfall, river flow, groundwater, reclaimed water, and then we also have demands. If we didn't have demands, we'd have plenty of supply, and there would be no problem. This is a good thing. But with demands, eventually, sometimes the demands exceeded our supply. In fact, many times. And normally, unfortunately, it's been tilted that way, where the demands have exceeded our supply of water. And so, as we go through this history, you'll kind of see that. So, just briefly, we'll just look at the Rancho era. The missions in the Rancho era. They really relied, for the most part, on rainfall. You know, the missions, my understanding is there's about 23,000 head of cattle that they ran up the Santa Clara River Valley during times. So they produced tallow for the most part. But what they relied on was the rainfall. So they did okay for quite a while. When they were looking for water here, actually, it was a very important consideration to build the mission. And so the Crespi Portola expedition when they were going down, this is actually Rancho Cumulos is right here. So this is the Piru groundwater basin. This is, Lake Piru would be up here somewhere. He was walking down through this area. You can kind of see where it's all green. And he goes, after accompanying us with a good sized flow of running water all during yesterday's march, the stream shortly after we set out today stopped flowing amid a great amount of sand in the bed of the stream, seemingly sinking into the many sands. The bed is plainly over 100 yards in width in spots. So what he was doing is he was coming out here and he was coming out into this area where, again, the surface water was going into the aquifer system. It's very much, the way you describe it is exactly the way it is now. There's always flowing water in this area, and then boom, it hits this aquifer system and the water just literally just disappears into the system. Of course, they went on and they found, actually, they're the ones who spotted the best place for the mission would be Ventura River, although they did make note of various good rivers in our system that could have been adequate. So, when looking at the missions, we're doing this all day here, moving back and forth. So, when looking at the missions, rainfall was enough for the most part. They had a fairly wet period. And then actually the cattle ranching and the ranches late after on, but then they went into a drought. There was a lack of rainfall. So all of a sudden the demands for the cattle and everything actually exceeded the supply, which was pretty much rainfall. As a result, the big ranches had to get divided up. People like Thomas Bard actually bought up big tracts and started cutting it up into smaller farming. So once it got cut up into the smaller farms, the era of river diversions actually really started for the most part. And this really started in the 1870s, and it went all the way through the 1910s. So I'm going to show you, this is a map in 1912 of the Santa Clara River Valley. The areas in green are actually irrigated acres all throughout the Santa Clara River Valley, and the red lines, which you probably can't see very well, are actually diversions. So up here, this is the Piru Basin right here. You can see there's a fair amount. Right here, this was the Cumulos diversion, and that fed this area right in here. So looking at Piru, we had this was what the diversion looked like. It came down through here, fed this entire area. It worked well. There was plenty of water, especially up in the main stems or in the rising groundwater areas of these groundwater aquifers. Looking down further, there's farmers irrigation right here, where they actually took water and fed this area right in here. And then there was the Santa Clara River diversion. This one was a little bit bigger. Actually, it ended up extending all the way down to Port Hueneme here at one point. They had a hard time maintaining enough flow to get down there, but they did at times. There were some issues with diversions back then. For example, the one here in Santa Paula, Dr. Giberson wrote, he goes, "The people of our town are grumbling no little about the water that comes into our town. It first passes through a large swine corral before reaching town and has a rather hoggish aroma." So, lesson, don't put diversions and don't put them through, swine corrals, maybe. I can only hope, looking at them, I was like, I hope they had a different drinking water source. I don't know. Anyway. So as the farms expanded and there was water, there's now river diversion. They start going into the Oxnard Plain here, where a good portion of it was considered alkali. It was kind of a salty crest of if the water didn't really flow out to the ocean, it became very salty and just kind of sat there. So there was large sections, especially just kind of out this way, that were alkali. There was nothing growing on it at all. They eventually kind of reclaimed that. They started digging ditches, draining it all out. And as a result, and I don't know if this is actually right there, but as a result, they started farming this land. So
Do you have any idea where the picture on the right?
this one, it is out that way. I believe I don't know exactly where it's out on the coastal plain though. Kind of hard to, that's probably the islands right there. You see the little bumps right there? But I'm not too sure exactly. Yeah.
So how did it go about taking out of the alkaline concentrate?
That I'm not too sure. I think it helped by creating the drains so that when the river flow came into there, it actually just is sluiced out all of that. And then they could turn it.
They actually formed drainage districts,
Mhm.
and then they had to tile the land, and the water would seep down to put in pipes, and the pipes, the water would flush down, clean up, and all the bad water would go into these pipes, and the pipes would empty into the drainage ditches. The drainage ditches went out to the ocean.
There you go. And so these are part of that drainage system right there, all of this. So they drain it all out, and we had very productive farmland after that. But as we expanded, here we are, 20,000 acres of irrigated land. The river diversions really weren't quite doing it. In part, I just want to show you a quick graph right here, is that this red line would be the average flows in the Santa Clara River. So on the average, we actually have a fair amount in January, February, March, but just so you know, there's a lot of variability. As I mentioned, we have 2 CFS, which is down here right now, where on average we have hundreds. So, but this is the average flows. And so what you can see is during the summertime, when the demands are higher, actually there wasn't enough water in the diversions. So they had to turn and look. So now the supply, again, the supply was fine until they started growing too much. And 20,000 acre feet was too much. Your demands now exceeded your supplies, so they had to go somewhere else. They wanted to look somewhere else. But during this time also, they were doing something else. It was developing some of the wells out on the Oxnard Plain, which some of you have already mentioned to me, that you're very familiar with those. And these are artesian wells. So I'm going to kind of explain what an artesian well is. If you look at, remember when I drew the cross-section of the entire, the Oxnard forebay and the Oxnard Plain right here, what happens is when water levels are high in the recharge zone, so when we put lots of water in there, there's a pressure. And let's say you start digging a well down here and you actually go through the clay cap, what happens is this pressure of this water actually pushes the water up, and you actually have an artesian condition. So they talk about many wells in this area, they could actually plumb water up to their 2nd-story home. Or some of them would put caps on it and shoot the water up. Well, this worked really well, and I felt obligated, since I'm here talking about history, that I had to mention Thomas Barr, since I'm here in Port Hueneme. And actually, mentioning him was actually a really good reason. When he dug one of these wells in the 1870s, early 1870s, his well actually made national news. And it actually made Popular Science Monthly, Journal of Outdoor Life, and Scientific American, which were all big publications then. But it wasn't really for the water. It was actually for subterranean fish. And so here, let me read this. It goes, for the purpose of supplying water to the new wharf at Port Hueneme, an artesian well was sunk at a depth of 143 feet. So we went past the clay cap. And a strong flow of water was obtained, which spouted 30 feet high. That was after capping it and nozzling it, by the way. That wasn't full. It said the men noticed fish in the wastewater. The well was found to be filled with young trout, thousands of them being thrown out at every jet. And some of these scientific magazines, mind you, Scientific American is a very good scientific journal. They go, it was asked if the fish could have come from its headwaters by some subterranean outlet. So they were thinking, some of them were wondering, it's like, well, they're seeing these young fish shooting out of this shooting out of this is not his actual well, but this is a very similar coastal artesian well that was dug. That they'd see these fish shooting out of here, and they thought, well, maybe they're coming, because they knew that there were trout up in the Sespe and so forth, and they thought that trout were somehow maybe getting down in this subterranean river and actually coming out of the well right here. I don't think so, but what was happening, most likely, because I do believe the trout story, is that he was digging this at Port Hueneme for the wharf. And more than likely, they just kind of let this flow out, as most of those guys did. Most of the people who dug these wells, who had artesian conditions, they thought that this was going to last forever. They thought that this was inexhaustible. So what they did is they let that run right out to the ocean, right? Okay, so there are what is called a steelhead trout here in our river system. The steelhead trout, a regular trout lives up in the watershed and never leaves, right? A rainbow trout. But there are some, and I'll be talking about these in a minute, that become steelhead. They want to actually go out to the ocean, migrate out to the ocean. They're about 2 years old when they do this. They go out to the ocean, they're smolts at this time, they live out there for a while, they become actually nice big steelhead trout, and then they come back up again. Well, probably what he was doing is letting this run out to the ocean. Steelhead were out in the ocean. They say, hey, here's a nice little freshwater river for me to go up into. They get up into here, they probably spawned, laid their eggs here, and then when he turns this well back up again, somehow maybe the fish somehow got into that stream, and they felt that's, you know, that they was coming out of the wells. If you guys have good history of Thomas Bard, and you could actually find some of his well data or him digging these wells, I would love to look into this a little further, because we only found it because of these magazines articles right here. We didn't find it otherwise.
It wasn't in the too high biography, I read that.
No? Okay. So maybe it'll just be a mystery forever. I don't know. So.
Isn't Bubbling Springs an artesian?
Sure. Yeah. And it still flows, doesn't it? Is it still flowing right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know where the pressure component is for it to come out of the ground, but it is, yeah, it's, you know, but there's artesian conditions everywhere here. So when Thomas Bard did this, it was, you know, anybody who just dug a hole 143 feet deep, you know, nice one, boom, they got fresh water. And there were accounts of all in Oxnard Plain, people formed and they made lakes that they could go boating on, and they just kept it running because it was nice, beautiful, fresh water. But what happened though, right around, we went into a drought right around the 1900s, very early 1900s, and my understanding is when some bigger agriculture started taking up, is that was the first time they saw the wells go away. The artesian conditions started going away, but history, it was perfect timing in that they just invented the deep well turbine. So now they could actually go down there and pull that water out. So they weren't all that concerned about it. That, you know, yeah, they didn't have to power it to get the water, but now they could just, you know, sink a well or sink a pump down there and put that water back out again. So they were okay. They felt like they were okay. So with the groundwater and the groundwater pumping at that time, actually, the supply, because it was a fairly wet period, 1910s to 1920s, the supply actually exceeded the demand. Things were good. Growth was going like crazy. And again, I mentioned that was a very wet period. So if we're looking at see, it's right up in here. So this where you see it was a long period of just being up high up on that peak right there. So things were good.
Marty?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this chart. The overall trend line is relatively flat.
Yeah. No, we don't see all of a sudden it's getting drier historically or wetter historically, and you know, you can look at global climate change and that sort of thing. We're not seeing a general trend of, gosh, we're headed into something else. Not yet. But I will say that, you know, there's a science called dendrochronology. And that's where they actually go into trees and they core it out and they look at the history, and sometimes then you can go back a couple thousand years on some of these trees. And they've identified 50-year plus droughts. You know, so while we've seen some nice droughts, you know, these are some pretty big droughts. Sometimes if you go back to the triggering data, you'll see that it is actually 50 years. So we could, you know, we can't assume that all of a sudden now, or even though we're at the bottom of this trough, we can't assume that it's always going to just shoot right back up again like a lot of these did. This one actually took quite a while to climb out. And so we don't know. Yeah, obviously it could be another dry year next year.
Say, Murray, what is the source of the graphite down by the beach near the power plant?
That is perch zone water. So again, you remember how we had the perch zone there. So any agriculture runoff and that sort of thing and rainfall all go into the perch zone, and then it actually just kind of comes out there right at the graphite. And same with a big part of the estuary also gets
Where
there.
on your chart is the early 50s?
Early 50s would be, see, 19, right here.
I was in rear mortuary garage and he broke a hole in the cement. You could see the water flowing in about 1952 or 4.
Which was a dry period. That's yeah, that's interesting. But that could also be a product of the perch zone. I'm not too sure. Yeah.
We say perch, so P-E-R-C-H like the fish.
Yeah, perched. Yeah, perched zone. So
What's the definition of perch? Is it because of the clay cap?
it's
It's the water that the clay cap is holding.
exactly. So water levels down here could have less of a pressure than than the perch zone, or actually it have more. It'd be static actually, but basically that water cannot go through, so it's kind of like a little lake underground where it just can't go down and percolate down further. So we had tremendous growth during this period. 1910s, we were looking at 10,000 acre feet, 20s, 40,000. By 1930, we're looking at 66,000 acre feet of irrigated lands. Growth was going very fast. You can see how well it was developed by the 1920s right here. Some of these were still dry farmed, but a lot of it was irrigated. Okay, so I can't go through this period. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I should have asked a question about 3 minutes ago when you were talking about the
Oh.
tree ring data. What trees did you say you were looking at?
Oh, we didn't look at them. They've looked in, mostly they have to go up into the mountains to look at trees that last that long. And of course, if you go back 2,000 years, then you have to go to Bristol Combs up there in the Sierras. That's, because there aren't any that look down here. But neat little science that's there. Okay, so I can't talk about this period from the 1900 to the 1920s without mentioning something else. A long time ago, United Water hired a historian to look at steelhead trout and to come up with everything that they could regarding steelhead trout. In part, because we have to provide a fair amount of water and resources to provide for this species, which is considered endangered now. So I mentioned what a steelhead trout is. It's basically a rainbow trout. In fact, they're identical. The identical species is a rainbow trout, except the life form is endangered right now. Meaning the life form, the ones that like to go down to the ocean and come back are endangered. The rainbow trout are identical, but they are not endangered. So back in in the 1800s, fishing was big. Early 1900s, it was huge. School would be canceled on opening day of fishing in this area. But one thing that people don't know is, yes, there were a lot of trout, but one thing that people don't really realize is that a lot of that was a product of up north. We were bringing fish in the millions from up north and bringing them down to Southern California here. And so, for example, we hired a historian to look into all this and talk about the whole history. And she ended up coming up with a 700-page summary of all the steelhead information that's available online, but found some really neat stuff. But basically, here's a title: 3 million fish in total. Southern trout planting, a boost to angling. So they're planting 3 million that year. Plant trouts in south. streams well stocked. And how did they do this is that they actually had, well, they had fish hatcheries up north. They would gather steelhead trout that would come into the system. They would raise them into young fry, and then they had cars, railroad cars, that were specially built to bring those fish back down here again. And so it always became big news, you know, that when these guys are coming down. So everybody would meet the trains at the bridges. They'd go to Piru, Fillmore, Santa Paula, and as the train drove down there, they would stop and they would unload these milk cans. They would give them to everybody who had cars, horses, and everything else, and they would go up into the watershed and plant these young little steelhead trout. And so it eventually got to the point where actually they were planting just in our watershed alone, oh gosh, I think it was about 500,000 per year of these young steelhead. And as a result, this area became very well known for steelhead fishing. People from Los Angeles used to come up. It was a big deal. A neat little piece of history that actually we had something written up. We were hoping to get it put into the Ventura County's historical little booklets, and haven't gotten there yet. And they stopped kind of making them. So anyway, steelhead trout will likely come up later on when we're talking about water. Okay, so 1920s, as I mentioned, was very wet. We had lots of water. Well, Los Angeles and other areas started looking at our area and saying, hey, you guys got lots of water. You don't need this. And even Mulholland, after he'd finished building the aqueduct down to Los Angeles in the early 1910s, they began to realize that they're running out of water in Los Angeles. So even he was coming over here into the Sespe. There were concerns, you know, obviously the local concerns here in that these projects were being developed, and in fact, during the 1920s, there was over 1 million acre-feet that was in applications to be appropriated from our watershed to be hauled off to some other places. Just to give you an idea, we don't have that much water on average in the entire river. You know, this last year, we probably had a total of 20,000, or we can divert as little as 3,000 or 5,000 acre-feet in a year. So this is a very, very wet year. So they were trying to haul off all the water. And we have these old studies. This is a good example of one. This was the proposed Moore Park Conejo Irrigation District. They were going to build a dam in the Sespe, divert that water, run it along the hillsides, do an inverted siphon, all the way gravity feed, and feed Moore Park and that whole area. And part of their, and you can't see this, but this red line from all the way from here, all the way to here, shows excess water yield. So they were showing that, hey, these guys here, us, we don't need this water, but we can build a dam, and so we have available to us all this water. Well, that was a concern to the local residents, right? So both Teague and Sharp got together and said, we need to do something, because they remembered actually the turn of the century when we were in a drought. They remembered there was not enough water in this area. So they formed a group. They called together a meeting, and Teague had it met in his office, and more than likely, probably some of your relatives went to that meeting. It wouldn't surprise me. But they decided to form a group to help protect their water resources. And so what that became was first the Santa Clara River Protective Association, which later, 3 years later, became the Santa Clara Water Conservation District, which later becomes United Water Conservation District. And so they were first tasked to A, investigate the surface water and underground waters of the Santa Clara River, to protect the water supply of the Santa Clara River, and to prevent the removal of such waters. And so as a result, they ended up hiring a rather actually famous civil engineer a water resource civil engineer up in San Francisco. His name was Grunsky. And he did a report and he showed that, hey, these people down here, they need all this water. There is not excess water. It was a very, very important thing. And he later becomes even more famous 2 years later. This was 1926, so 2 years later he becomes more famous because of something else that happened in this valley. So he successfully showed that. We began to fight off almost all the water rights applications then. And also they recommended we should start enhancing our water supply in this area. So, but here our first real water fight was with Mulholland. And so they built San Francisco Dam. And they said, no, we're going to pass all the water through. We're not going to appropriate any. Before they built it, we didn't have an issue. They built it. All of a sudden, they went up for an application for water rights to hold on to that water. They said, you guys don't need that water. That's all runoff. When it's really high, it just goes out to the ocean. So we fought them on that. And Mulholland offered to do a percolation test. So this is the first real big percolation test out here in the valley, where they sent out 600 CFS out of their dam, and actually it wasn't out of the dam, it was out of another release point, to see what would happen to that water. Mulholland's comments to these guys, to us, was they better have fast horses because it's going to go out to the ocean in less than a day. And it turned out when they sent the 600 CFS out, they did it for 2 days, it didn't even make it to LA County line. It all perked into the aquifer system. So they were wrong. It showed that we do benefit from that water by going into groundwater recharge. So therefore, they did not have a right to take that water. We fought that one off. And as a result, though, obviously 2 years later, that one wasn't a worry. A lot of that water did go out to the ocean. But I mentioned Grunsky. Actually, he became the engineer who had to do the studies of why did that thing fail, actually. So he was back down here again after working with us. He is now figuring out what happened and how did it fail.
So is that picture on the right, is that St. Francis Dam?
Yeah, St. Francis Dam there, yeah, before it failed. We have, these were some original pictures that we had, which was really kind of neat. And there was a book that was just written and we had some that nobody had seen yet, so they were rather excited about that, of actually building of the St. Francis Dam. This was, well, here they're measuring. That's my predecessor 100 years ago, almost. Okay, so the other thing that came up was groundwater recharge. So here is the Freeman diversion 100 years, almost 90 years ago, right here. We were diverting water and we actually put it into spreading grounds. This is looking, this is East Ventura here, the Santa Clara River. It goes out to the ocean. You can't really see the ocean. This is kind of where our existing spreading grounds are, actually. So we had spreading grounds. They were doing well. We also used to go in and rip up the river bed so that it would enhance percolation, too. That was one of the big things that we did. So, as a result, our groundwater spreading was good. You know, we did lots of extra water, but you can see the growth rate of the demands of irrigated acres actually by 1945 had now reached 90,000 acres. Okay, so we had a small operation, a small diversion before that, and things weren't looking good. In fact, by 1949, I believe, Port Hueneme right here had the first seawater intruded well. They noted that the first well they had to shut down. So we knew that seawater intrusion was coming in at that time. They had already seen it in Santa Monica. They knew that this was going to be a problem. So actually Santa Clara River Protective Agency became United Water because then we were able to secure bonds and actually build big projects. We did that, formed in 1950. 1950 also we tried to go to the voters to build 2 dams. It was the Topo Topo and Santa Felicia Dam. That one was a total of $18 million. and it failed because basically it was too expensive. So in 1953, we went back and we went with a little bit cheaper option where we built Santa Felicia. We're offering to build Santa Felicia Dam plus downstream improvements, improve on the existing Freeman diversion, which was that little thing, right, that you saw before. We improved on that, and so that one was a total of, I think, $10 million bond, right over $10 million. But because we didn't put a dam on the Sespe, Cayugas now came back in and said, hey, you don't have a dam on the Sespe, we want that water. So again, here, the water fight started again. And this is an old newspaper clipping of United Water and Cayugas. And so we were fighting back and forth again on this. And so they wanted to dam the Sespe. We said, no, we have an application in. So we basically showed that eventually we won. And the state board revoked Cayugas' water rights application. And then we went in for 2 dams on the Sespe. We went to the voters again. We wanted to build one, and it's called Topo Topo Reservoir. This is a drawing, an artist's impression of it. And then another one, I think it's called Cold Springs or Cold Dam. These two, so we went to the voters of the county. We ended up losing by, my understanding is right around 20 votes. So out of the entire county, thousands of people, 20 votes, we would have had 2 different dams on the Sespe. Whether that would have solved our water problems, I doubt it. Because again, you increase your supply, likely demands would have increased. Yeah.
Good morning, Jim Hensley here. Cities have a requirement a lot of times when they put items to the vote, they can't finance some of the promotion of that vote. Is United Water District under that same curtailment, or can you promote, or were you able to promote?
Well, I remember we had booklets that were out that, whether that was a promotion or informational, I'm not too sure.
You can have informational,
yeah,
I agree, but when you start going radio, TV, newspaper ads, things like that.
Okay, so I've never seen promotional items, I don't think, for those. So we may have been restricted on that. I do know that when I gave a similar talk, somebody was telling me, she goes, I used to help put in flyers to promote these 2 dams. She was actually mailing off all the flyers for these dams. And my comment was, too bad you didn't send 20 more, because that's all,
Well, a lot of times they'll set up an ad hoc committee that's separate from it, a political action committee, or if the community itself cannot get it sold, and it's harder to sell it. Somebody else has to come in and do it. And you're a special district, so consequently you probably follow the same rule.
I think so, and I think that's likely what happened, is, they were promoting it, not us. But either way, so that was it. After that, there were concerns back then. Condors were actually becoming, rare, and people were concerned about that. And in fact, there is a kind of a promotional item. We have a big 3-dimensional map of this whole area showing those 2 dams that we're showing people. So.
Did they ever consider putting it, years later, putting that back up for a vote again, or?
No, I think that was pretty much it after this. Yeah.
The second question, just out of curiosity briefly, we know the Matilahaw Dam just filled up with mud. When he builds dams under not the correct conditions, the mud fills it in. Would these 2 dams have incurred a lot of mud back up, or would it have been clean flowing?
It's cleaner flowing than the Matilahaw. I mean, just for example, we built Santa Felicia Dam in 1955. We've lost about 20%, or a little over 20% of its capacity. So we still feel we have over 100 years of more usage before it has to become a golf course or whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dams do have a life, and that's just part of the calculation. Okay, so all the way 1950s through the 1980s, we were pretty much doing the same thing. Things were going along pretty well. But what's happening is that our diversion system really relied on an earthen berm. And so they would get out in the rivers, whenever the big flows came, wash out that earthen berm, they'd get out in the river and push that thing back up again and divert that water as soon as they could. That was becoming more and more of a problem here. And the reason being is in the 1950s, there was a lot of gravel mining out there in the riverbed. And when they did gravel mining, they cut these deep, basically pits, and they let it fill in the following year. Well, that caused the river to drop further and further and further. Well, we had our spreading grounds, which were at a fixed elevation. So we had to keep building our berms higher and higher to divert that water, or also to go further and further up the river. That was becoming a real problem, actually, and a concern. But also what was becoming a concern is that in the 1970s, they started seeing more and more seawater intrusion. In fact, there was about 20 miles of seawater intrusion out there in the Oxnard Plain at this time. And so the state came in, State Water Resources Control Board, and this is showing actually more of an existing example of seawater intrusion. As you can see, we are right over in here, so we're dead center of one of these canyons right here that really brings in the seawater intrusion. State Board came in, and here's an example of chloride levels going up in some monitoring things right here. So it's not a pretty picture. But anyway, so the State Board came in, they said, hey, we got some really concerns over this, over the seawater intrusion. They said, we will, either you guys are gonna have to do something, or we're gonna adjudicate your basins. Adjudicating basins basically means the State Board will come over, they'll take it over, and then they'll let somebody else just divvy up exactly what they're allowed to pump, and then that's it. Nobody wanted an outside source coming in here and telling us how to use our water. So there was a fix, and they offered us, they said, okay, if you do this fix, we won't adjudicate your basin. And basically, what that was is to build the Freeman diversion, create the PTP, the pumping trough pipeline, which I'll show you in a minute, and also the creation of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency that would be able to restrict pumping out here on the Oxnard Plain. That is not United Water, it's actually a separate entity. So we built the Freeman diversion, 1990. We were very fortunate, we built it right in the middle of the drought. Because you can imagine building this thing, right? This is going all the way across the Santa Clara River. Not an easy task, but it's in the middle of the drought, so it made it a whole lot better. But in doing so, what we were doing really was we were holding, the Freeman diversion really is made to hold back the earth and not water, right? So you remember I mentioned the riverbed kept dropping and dropping. We needed to stop that progression of the riverbed dropping, and so we built the Freeman diversion so that we could divert water at a fixed point. But doing this, we had a 25-foot drop right here. And so there were still concerns that there were rumors that there were still steelhead in this river system. And so as a result, the State Water Resources Control Board asked Fish and Game to conduct a study. They went out there and they trapped everywhere the Sespe and for migration of steelhead. They ended up in their 2 years, they found 2 steelhead. And so they said, you know what, there still is that resource here, so therefore you guys need to put in a fish ladder. So we did, we put in a fish ladder, and we were also told we had to do a certain amount of bypass flows, meaning we couldn't divert all the water, we had to let some of it down for steelhead migration.
You know, the bottom picture there, where is that?
The fish ladder would be right over here
No,
on
but I
this.
mean, what, that area?
Oh, where's this? Oh, sorry, this is above Satacoy. You're looking at, there's the town of Santa Paula right over here.
Okay.
So it's kind of in between Satacoy and Santa Paula there.
I had high school kids in the 50s still catching steelhead out towards Hueneme way.
Which river system?
Oh, in those irrigation ditches. out
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because when you go back over the history, after like the 1930s, I think most of the steelhead you hear are irrigation ditches, and also I heard about when they dug this the harbor out here. The steelhead used to come in where there used to be some rising groundwater there, and the steelhead would actually come into that area and just kind of hang out there. I'm sure it was known for fishing at some point.
Yeah, that harbor land always had water standing on
Yeah, I'm very curious about that, actually. So we built the Freeman diversion, and I was hoping Shelley would be here, but What's
He
that
had a
right there?
date with Stormy Daniels.
Let's believe
Let's keep it political correct.
And we have, what, Dan and them in there, Lynn Mulhart right there, right? And, that's, gosh, I'm spacing his name right now. But anyway, so this was during the building of the Freeman diversion, right around 1990, actually.
Would this be a semi-accurate statement? The farmers have done more to consolidate, conserve water than us city folks.
Oh, I don't know. City folks have, they've been restricted, they had to cut back
Well, I'm talking
25%.
about actually being involved in organization.
Oh. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
I think so.
But, you know, I would say that there's been some great efforts to reduce the demand because the supply's not there anymore, right? And there isn't as much supply, and there's been great efforts to reduce that demand. And the more we can do that, the more we're going to achieve that balance and actually, you know, get past this seawater intrusion. What's that?
Just the development of drip irrigation.
Yeah, absolutely. That is reduced. In fact, I don't have a graph showing that, but the actual pumping in Oxnard Plain it has gone down, you know, and so that's a good thing. And they haven't lessened the amount of acres, so yeah, the more we can promote that, the better off we are. So here's the Freeman diversion. You can't really see the fish passage over here. It is operated phenomenally since it was built in 1990. We've had some of the biggest storms go over that thing. 3 days later, we can just turn that thing on and start diverting the water. Most everything else that has been out in this river system just gets demolished. And this thing, they built it right, they built it well, and as a result, we actually divert right around, on average, about 60,000 acre-feet per year at the Freeman diversion. It all is part of a bigger system where we have groundwater recharge in the forebay, and we also have deliveries, surface water delivery systems go on this red pipe. It goes out to the PTP, the pumping trough pipeline, and delivers out to Pleasant Valley County Water District. We do that because we can recharge here really well, but if we can get people not to pump in this area by giving them surface water, then you're almost essentially recharging in this area too, or getting them not to pump, which is a good thing, because this is where, remember if we saw the seawater intrusion, it's in these areas down here. It isn't up here, of course, because that's our source of recharge. So we have the Freeman diversion. This river is one of the most highest sediment-laden rivers in the world, actually. It produces more sediment per square area than most in the world. And so as a result, we have to take those fines out. We take it out through a desilting basin right here. We put a polymer into it, it knocks it out, and the polymer goes down. We put it into our spreading grounds. Right here, for example, this one, you know, when we go to groundwater conferences, you know, people do talks, and they're proud of getting about 2 feet per day on percolation. This pond right here will get about 15 feet per day. So here we are diverting from one of the most sediment-laden rivers in the world, and we're getting 15 feet per day. Now, I like to credit United, but in a way, it's just the geology out here. We got phenomenal geology to be able to percolate a lot of water. So this is all, it's a good, They move. Escape out of it. All right. Didn't like that. Maybe I can do that. There we go. We do it that way. So basically we have, and I just mentioned all these pictures. And the other thing we have, and this is what we put in 1950, is we also wanted to reduce the pumping by the cities out here along the coast also. And so we built the El Rio spreading grounds, where we also have a series of wells for drinking water, and we have the Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline, which actually comes down here and goes out into this area. And as I mentioned, on average, our spreading grounds, we'll put about 21,000 acre feet in Saticoy, 4,000 in Noble, El Rio down here, 24,000 acre feet of water. But I mentioned the drought. Just to give you an idea of variability, I think we're only at, so far this year, 300 acre feet instead of 21,040. When you add all these together, we're only at 300 acre feet, so we've got a long way to go.
I had a question. How much does fracking, this new fracking thing, does that have any effect on our water?
No, those are much deeper aquifer systems or systems. They're way thousands of feet down. So yeah, we don't see any effect on that. So basically, I mean, our goal is we do have supplies, and we have future supplies here that we haven't fully utilized yet. Right now, we do have seawater intrusion. Water levels are way low on the coastline. We do have problems, but we do also have future. We have reclaimed water, we have imported water, state water. We have potential to get more supply down so that everybody can use it. The idea is that we're going to try to get a nice even balance of supply and demand right here. And that's really been the story, is that we've been going back and forth. When supply has been plentiful, we tend to grow. We use it all. When supply goes down, we get problems, and then we try to fix those supply problems. We build dams, diversions, everything else. So it's been going back and forth. There's something called the Groundwater Sustainability Act, where now we have to achieve this balance, right? And we're going to end up being balanced. We need to be balanced. They're going to also look at demands. They're going to look at reducing demands, and they're also going to look at how can we increase those supplies so that we are balanced.
Yeah. So since like this area is really known for agriculture, is this kind of information kind of worked with farmers to see what kind of crops they should plant? Like the transition right now to like raspberries instead of strawberries or something. Does that kind of have to do with like the amount of water produced, or is that just whatever they decided?
Okay, as for United Water, we make sure that we don't tell people what to grow, how to grow, or do any of that. We're purely a supply district. We try to increase those supplies as much as possible. It's not our job to look at the demands. Now the GSAs, when they come in and form, they are going to look at demand. They're not going to tell you can't grow this type of crop, but they may end up telling you can only pump X amount, and if you want more water, you got to buy it from here. You got to find some other way to get it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I know you're going over time, and I don't mean to push you on this, but two things of interest to me. Number one, your deeper wells, which you had to go into in the previous years, question number one, how old were some of those wells with water coming up, I should say? Number two, you guys are starting to think about putting in or planning pre-treatment like green sand to pre-treat the iron and the manganese out. How far are you in that stage?
Okay. How old is that water, the deeper, okay, you're talking about Oxnard, you're talking about drinking water.
Yes, sir.
You're not talking about the PTP.
That's what we pull from.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So what's going on there is that we have, on the shallow system, we have very high nitrates. And they were going through the roof here. And so what we have to do is we have to blend that water with deeper water, which is higher in iron and manganese. And that creates problems for the city of Port Hueneme and their treatment plant. But we have a restriction. We cannot deliver high nitrate water. We cannot do that. So therefore, we do deliver this other water. And that, and the status of that plant, I hate to say it, I do not know. That's an engineering department, and I actually briefly asked somebody, and I don't know how that's going. You don't know either? I do know that we do have an engineer working on that. When it will be in place, I'm not too sure.
Thank you, sir.
So for Port Hueneme, this area here, what is the source point of our drinking water and water that we use in our households?
Okay. Well, so you use partly state water, actually, that comes down through Callegas and, and through the pipeline system. And then you also use some of our system, right here, where we pump water from the El Rio and we deliver it down into this area. Right?
So it's a mixture. Now, is there a point where they add chlorine and fluorine in our supply here? Or
Yeah, well, we add it up here, and then you get, I believe, you guys have your own plants too, where you mix it too. You add some extra in.
So we get fluorine and chlorine also added into our supply as far as you know?
As far as I know, yeah. I'm the surface water hydrologist, so I deal mostly with the surface water, rivers, and once it gets into the ground, it's kind of groundwater, and then once it goes into the pipes, it's usually it's O&M guys who deal with most of that. Yeah.
So the Callegas Creek is more seasonal. I mean, it's more like it flows only kind of when it rains and there's not a natural flow.
There's no real discharging aquifers that let it just kind of bleed out, except for, of course, there's treatment plants that are discharging, 1,000 Oaks is discharging. And people are making use of that water, actually. So there is a diversion downstream that is able to use that water. So it's good. Yeah.
There's also a small Bureau of Reclamation brackish water desal plant there.
In,
Kind of in Port Hueneme, Ironwood Road.
okay. Yeah.
That's our potable water plant.
So there are some local.
That's where the water gets blended. That's our potable plant. We're not taking any groundwater in that plant.
Right.
We could, but we're not.
And that's the one where our water, when it's high in iron and manganese, it wreaks havoc on that one, on that system. That's my understanding.
Yeah. You have another system on the other side by Magoo, and the settling ponds out there. Are those count?
Those are duck ponds, I think, out by Magoo.
Okay, so that's not one of the water districts.
No, that's a hunting facility, actually, where they spread the water, grow some barley, and ducks come in. And
Camarosa has a plant at the university. That's a different water district on these guys.
Yeah.
With all of the cement ditches, is there losing any water that could have percolated down before we cemented them all in?
We're really lucky that we don't have a whole lot of cement ditches, and where they are, they tend to be in the perch zone. Where the clay cap is, so if it does perk in, it's not going into our aquifer system, it's not benefiting it. One thing I believe is a concern is that we're putting more and more plastic up in ag, and the runoff factor is much higher. If we start going up the valley, we really should try to capture some of that water, because your runoff factor is much, much higher. It's just going to shoot out to the ocean, where historically it actually used to work into the ground. So, that would